This year, on the anniversary of the 1971 Attica prisoner uprising, the prisoners across the United States, even as far as Nova Scotia, went on strike from August 21st to September 9th, protesting the inhumane conditions in which they are being held and the exploitative modern slave labor they are forced to work. This year's prison strike got more national attention than other strikes of recent years and shed light on the state of emergency that our corrections, or rather confinement industry, is in. But now that the official strike has ended and the public's attention has been gained, the most important question is, what is this movement's next step in reforming the prison industrial complex? And equally important is how we can protect the protesting prisoners from the very real threat of off-the-books retaliation by the state for the exercising of their First Amendment right. To help us answer these important questions and more, we are joined today by Kim Wilson, a PhD in urban affairs and public policy and co-host of the Beyond the Prison podcast. Welcome, Kim. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
Kim, like Tabitha just mentioned, I think the biggest question moving forward now that the strike is kind of, coming to an end. I know there's reports a few people are still, protesting out there, but the biggest question for the prisoners and prison reform activists is, they got some eyes on this important issue. What's the next step?
Well, I think, first of all, it's a little misleading to say that the strike is over because, as Jailhouse Lawyers Speak has pointed out through the Incarcerated Workers Organizing Committee website, that individual prisoners are able to set their own deadline in terms of when they want to finish striking, and they can continue these actions indefinitely. So that's just a little bit of clarification around that. In terms of next steps, I think, again, Jailhouse Lawyers Speak has issued a statement, again, on the IWOC website, where they describe that the next step is they've issued a petition, that's number one, but also to continue supporting people that are striking or taking actions inside of prisons around the country. So those are the two major things that Jailhouse Lawyers Speak, as well as the other organizations involved, the Free Alabama Movement, for example, and IWOC, have continued to push.
So all aspects of this issue are important, and there's many levels. There isn't one solution to anything. But Kim, what do you think are the most important reforms that prisoners need addressed right away? What are the things we should be making phone calls, writing letters, writing checks? What are those things that are number one immediate needs?
Yeah, I think, well, the prisoners issued a list of 10 demands, and those demands, again, are available on the IWOC website. But to continue, pressing these issues both on the inside and the outside so that it stays in the public eye. I know that a lot of reporters and other people that jumped on a story early on seem to have fallen off, and it's no longer, a hot topic. But this is really the focus. Jailhouse Lawyers Speak has also been very clear about the fact that they want to hold back in terms of, saying that this is the next step, because they haven't had an opportunity to talk to all of the other striking people around the country, and they're going to be doing that in the coming weeks and months. So this is really a protracted project. This isn't something that's going to be done or over with, today or tomorrow. So it's really difficult to tell.
Yeah. Now, we mentioned it. Is there a real fear of retaliation against prisoners who are either on strike or were striking? And if so, what forms does this kind of off the books? Because I know that no prison is going to make it like, hey, guess what? We retaliated against a prisoner. Yeah. What forms does that kind of retaliation take against these prisoners who are exercising their First Amendment right? You still get to keep your rights regardless of whether you're in prison or not.
Right.
Well, at least in theory, right?
Yeah.
Well, one of the things around retaliation that I think is important to point out is that many departments of correction around the country took preemptive action to lock down prisons, to slow down or stop all mail communication. They stopped all visitation. So these things really were designed to disrupt the kind of activities that the strikers were engaged in, so that we couldn't get any communication coming from, places around the country. And this was in prisons where there was no report of strike activity that had even happened yet. So during the strike and after as well, we've had multiple reports of at least some of the more high-profile political prisoners being retaliated against. For example, Kinetic Justice in Alabama was moved to isolation, so he was put in solitary confinement because they knew that he had been involved in, organizing the strike. We've heard multiple reports of people having new charges leveled against them for inciting riots as a result of their activity or support for the strike. Whether that's true or not is really, or seems to be, irrelevant when it comes to the DOCs around the country. So those are just a couple of examples. Again, I would point folks to the Incarcerated Workers Organizing Committee's website, because they do list all of the political prisoners and the retaliatory actions that were taken there. So if people want to write to them, they, those things are available.
Mm-hmm. Kim, one of the things that always strikes me about the prison debate, any debate about prisons, is this idea that people have a hard time sort of putting it together in the same sort of group as other social justice areas. It's easy to get behind a lot of things, but prison and prison reform and the treatment of prisoners is always that thing that's really hard to get intersection in social justice on. In this case, with the prison strike, you did have a lot of press. There was a lot of press that did cover it, maybe not the big mainstream in the level we'd like, but a lot of press took notice of it. A lot of public took notice of it. And it seems that it was barely a blip on the radar of politicians at all, especially in Washington, despite the size of it. Why do you think that so many political leaders, considering what they're essentially doing, is setting up a system in which this protest has created political prisoners, something we fight against in any other country in the world if they do it? Mm-hmm. So what do you think, with that on that, why do you think political leaders are not taking up a cause, or at least commenting on it? And why is it so hard for us to intersect our social justice with prisons?
Well, there are a number of different things that are going on here. I think primarily, prisoner advocacy seems to be, the hot potato. So people don't want to touch it. And there are historical reasons for that, and I want to come back to that momentarily. But I think to your first point regarding, why this is a difficult social justice issue, even for people who are involved in, let's say, progressive leftist movements, it's a really difficult issue for them to get behind, because prisoners are not seen as sympathetic. They're seen as being rule breakers, law breakers, people that have caused harm in their communities and to society, and whatever harsh punishment that they get is deserved, right? So it's this mentality of just desserts, that, oh well, this is what you get. So I think that makes it incredibly difficult for a lot of people, or the average person, I would say, to find empathy with people who are protesting the really dehumanizing conditions inside. That said, I organize and lead, workshops on prison abolition, and I just did one last night where we talked about these issues and why this is really deeply problematic. And people respond. Once they start engaging in that conversation, people are like, oh, well, can you tell me more? I really had no idea that this is what was going on. Now, to your other point regarding, politicians, prisons are a tough sell, or prisoners are a tough sell, and I don't think that politicians see it as, within the sort of thing that they should be talking about, because no politician wants to appear to be soft on crime. And I think that this goes back to, things like the Willie Horton case in 1988, and we're still carrying that historical baggage into 2018. And it's affecting the way that politicians feel that they can or should respond to things that are happening inside of prisons. They don't want to touch it at all, and they don't say anything about it. Again, for the reasons that I stated.
Not to mention that I think both political parties do, get that money from the prison industrial complex or from businesses that profit from the prison industrial complex. So there's also that kind of campaign financial aspect there as well of why, better not touch this because it actually affects a lot of people that support me politically.
Right.
I just want to finish up, at the end here and ask, what can folks do at home, people who say, you know what, this is something I'm aware of, I want to help out with. What can people do at home to help our incarcerated citizens be treated more humane? What's the best thing for people to do to help in this reform?
I think on the ground, people can, first of all, I would point them to the IWOC website, incarceratedworkers.com or .org, sorry. There's a list of things that are happening there. There are phone zaps, so we're calling into the prison in an organized way when we get reports of retaliation happening against specific prisoners or groups of prisoners, and those are things that people can, get involved with immediately. We're posting a lot of that stuff and sharing that information on Twitter. People can write to prisoners around the country, not just the political prisoners that are listed on the IWOC website, but they can get involved with organizations like Black and Pink, and they have a tremendous pen pal program. Writing to people inside a prison is a lifeline, and it makes them feel, that someone on the outside actually cares.
Most definitely. Kim Wilson, I got to say thank you so much for coming on today, co-host of Beyond Prison podcast. Thank you again for informing our audience today.
Thank you for having me.
Pleasure.